I made an ass of this already, but that's all right. So I was walking along the street in Brisbane, and I bumped into Gareth. It was totally unplanned. It was serendipitous. And the reason this joke hasn't worked is because I flicked the slide too early. Right? So it was totally unplanned, but we caught up, and I said to Gareth, hey, I would really love you to come on our book club. Literally, was it, Gareth, 2 minutes or something? We chatted to him.
Yeah, that was it. Walking through the football sort of ground down by the riverside.
Bastards.
Yeah, so it was like, honestly, I was like that.
Mate, he stalked you.
Yeah. I was walking along the river, and I was like, I know that guy. How do I know that guy? So I just went up and said hello. But I do that with strangers, to be honest. Just go up and say hello. But you ready? Ready to go?
Yeah, my family were really surprised when they did.
Yeah. But everybody, I don't know about you, but I kind of feel that we're in the presence of somebody who's really, really amazing. And this is the reason why it's going to be the best book club ever. All right, everybody, welcome Gareth.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, it's when Steve said, do you fancy being on this? It's like, I'd love to. Getting out to Brisbane for the club is going to be a bit of a challenge. And in fact, I'm doing some delivery work in London, and the guy, my sort of point of contact, said, I see you got the Brisbane Book Club, and I'm doing some work with them next Tuesday and Wednesday as well. He said, you're not going to Brisbane for the weekend and back again. It's like, no, I'm not. Don't worry. Otherwise, it'd be in bits. So it would be lovely to be out there. My son really loved Brisbane while we're out there, so it's a great city. Yeah, it was really cool to bump into Stephen in the football park.
You would hate it. You would hate it the past couple of weeks, though, mate. It has been absolutely sweltering. Mind you, I suppose it's been pretty snowy, isn't it, over there? Nicey. I've been seeing some of the pictures.
Yeah, minus 10 centigrade, which is sort of unusual for where we are. So no, it's great. Thank you for inviting me.
No, mate, no, please, let's say we're very honest. But Gareth, I managed to get a copy of your book, and one of the first things that I noticed when I was reading through it was the line, safety is boring. In fact, that was the very first sort of line when I looked through it. Safety. Oh, look at you got a round of applause there, mate. People are obviously in agreement here. But mate, in that very same part, you talked about like safety is boring, and this is why this book doesn't focus on safety. I just wonder if you could talk through your thoughts on why you think safety is boring. And by the way, I agree too.
Because I wrote a couple of blogs about this as well. Safety is boring because when things are safe, inverted commas, nothing happens. We don't see anything occur when operations are safe. We create safety all the time. And so to say, right, we've got to be safe. You've got to do something that creates safety, and it's the something that's the interesting. So the book is all about developing high performance teams, but telling stories about where things haven't gone to plan. So we have to work so if I'm working with clients and things, I work on the fact that what we're trying to do is develop high performance teams, because safety comes as a byproduct of high performance. There's a bit of luck involved, but a lot of the time we have to work at it, and we don't necessarily realize we're doing it. And the work that I do is about accelerating teams to get to that point. One of the guys at the end of the session yesterday just finished a 2-day human organization performance class, and he said, what you're presenting up on the board, I can see happening out in the real world, out on the front line in the construction sites. They don't necessarily know what they're doing, and what you're doing is giving tools to provide a vocabulary and to accelerate that learning process, and to give them concrete tools that they can use in the real world to create safety. Safety just doesn't happen. It requires effort.
Yeah, mate, actually, I do have questions planned, but now you've just said something and I want to go change it a little bit. All right.
Isn't that what we discussed?
Right? Yeah, we did. I totally agree, right? I kind of agree, but no, I don't kind of agree. I totally agree with you about changing the vocabulary and changing the words and changing just the way that we talk about work, right? I mean, what's your experience, Gareth, with companies that have tried to do that and really try to push that narrative about changing the vocabulary? Have you got any insights for us that you could give us?
Yes, start with the vocabulary, because actually if you don't have a common language, and you don't start shifting the things, that the words are what we say all the time when we interact with people. That's, it's how we build relationships and create understanding. The fact that we've just had narrative and it's changed direction because of something that's just been said, it's really amazing how much you can change by simple things like moving violations into adaptations, workarounds. So people, don't come to work to do that bad thing. They're trying to get and understand, they're trying to get to what you reward. So getting leaders to understand, oh yeah, this is all about productivity. So what do you reward people to get that productivity? Because that's what they're working towards, and getting them to shift that perspective. People often use the word obviously. Obviously, this is what's going to happen. Well, if it was obvious, would people have done the bad thing? No. So try and remove obviously from your language, because it puts people down in that sense. Audits and not non-conformances. If hands up, who's an audit or in the audit space in the audience? Anybody in the audit? Right. So by definition, your profession looks at non-conformances and deviances. Well, how's about reframing that to say, here's a learning opportunity? Now, it might be inside the organization, you can change the language, but outside the organization, you've got to use what they want to use, like non-conformance or a deviation. But if you can shift something inside your organization to basically move all the way towards learning, that's really what we should be doing.
No, I agree, mate. That was brilliant. Thank you. Gareth, another thing that when I read your book, it really resonated with me was you talk about situational awareness, right? And I remember hearing, I can't remember who said it, but they talked about there's only 3 professions that should lose situational awareness. That's divers, astronauts, and people that navigate ships. And that kind of makes sense, right? Because what you see a lot, and I know I've seen it in rooms at this size, you'll see people write in their investigations, such and such lost situational awareness. And you're like, but how can you lose situational awareness in this room? But mate, I was just wondering if you could maybe talk us through some of your insights about how we can navigate situational awareness, because I know that there will be people in this room. I don't generally see it because I will take it back and scroll it and ram it right up their bum. But I kind of wonder how would people in this room be able to start having those conversations about let's move away from situational awareness?
So yeah, so what I put on that is recognize that we've got a finite attention span. The sort of research is 7 plus or minus 2 elements that we can hold in our short-term working memory at any one time. So if something comes in and the buffer is full, other stuff falls out the other side. So there's a limit to what we can deal with in terms of our attention. So when people say you've lost situational awareness, what they're saying is, what we should be saying is, something took priority. What was it that was dangerous, interesting, pleasurable, or important? So DIPI is a framework that you can use to look at that. So if somebody loses situational awareness, they don't. What they do is they refocus it and ask the question, what were they paying attention to? Because then we can start to look at their rationality. And that's a key piece, is this local rationality. How did it make sense for somebody to do what they did? So as soon as you hear loss of situational awareness, it's the same as human error. It's a useless term. And often we hear this they lost situational awareness. Why? Because they weren't paying attention. Why weren't they paying attention? Because they didn't have situational awareness. And so you end up with this circular rubbish argument that actually doesn't help any learning. So the term often, loss of situational awareness, is what we can ascribe or attribute after the event. We know what the outcome is. We can join the dots using hindsight bias and say that was important. But if I've got one decision here and there are 4 outcomes, there are 4 outcomes, there are 4 outcomes, within 3 layers, I've got 64 potential different outcomes straight away. I don't know what those are. And what I will do is focus on what I believe is the most important thing to do at that time. And I will then focus on it. So you're looking at the screen at the moment. To me, Steve, do you know what's going on behind you? Can you see the people sticking fingers up at you? and making
No,
faces.
but that's just normal. That's
Yeah, well, there we go. So you don't, and so and so what happened now is I brought the attention. Yeah, that's it. So I brought your attention to something that's important or relevant, and that shifted it. So ask the question when we have this loss, where were people's attention and why was it focusing there? Because it might be that it was really important to them, but they haven't got the experience and the knowledge to understand the big picture. And if I hear that, that phrase, oh yeah, well, they should have paid more attention, loss of situational awareness, should have known better. I'll say, Stephen, have you encountered that before? Yeah. Have they encountered that before? No. So how would they know what the future looks like if they've never encountered it?
Yeah, mate. I'm going to tell a story. Actually, we've got a couple of people here from Origin where I work, and we have this. It's like,
Be mindful.
I am going to be mindful. We have this sort of wee situation where we're reliant on documentation, Gareth, and I say every single time, hey, look, we make too many mistakes every single time. Basically, every single week we're talking.
So what's happening here is you're not maintaining situational awareness on your audience. Look at them, and I can hear you.
But yeah, we have this sort of problem as well, where it's just people say they have to be careful. They have to. You're right. We hear it every Friday. They have to be careful. We need to. What can we do to make this easier for them? Like, talk to them, remind them, do this, put in a prompt, engineer it out. But it becomes like I think Gareth just talked about it there, that circular thing. You keep them round and round and round in circles.
So another thing that I would say, because a lot of what we do in the safety space, and I would say the performance space, is focused on the sharp end worker and the sharp end supervisor. If your leadership turns around and says, they should pay more attention, they should prioritize, my immediate comeback is, so do you get distracted? Do you miss things? And do you always follow the rules? And because, a lot of our space is focused down here, but the senior, middle management, senior management also have goal conflicts. They've got, government legislation to deal with. They've got external auditors. They've got the regulators. They've got the shareholders. That all drives their performance a certain way. So what you can do is turn that story around. When they look at, they're not being safe, when you sit there and go, okay, well, safe in your space is about achieving productivity goals, results, shareholder value, all sorts of stuff. Just change the focal point, and you can bring the same stories out with their space as well.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. You were talking about in your book as well, that communication, and I think that's something that we kind of all really struggle with, don't we? Or just,
especially as a jock.
Oh my word, I'm offended. A jock's a derogatory term for a Scottish person. But it's not derogatory, is it? It comes from a place of love.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I when I lived in England, this guy used to always call me a sweaty, and I was like, sweaty sock jock.
See, there's a communication. So that's a brilliant example there of communication, Stephen. You had an assumption what the audience knew about what sweaty meant. And this is about why we have these gaps in communication. Is because we make the assumptions about what other people are on. Now I know that Stephen's a little bit stressed here at the front, and so when we're stressed, we make assumptions. We make greater assumptions about what other people know. So I'm just going to say, make up some numbers. Stephen and I are talking, and I'm going to make an assumption that he knows about 30% of the topic, because there's a sort of shared understanding. He's trained, he's got some capabilities. And I'm going to give him 70% of the message to fill the rest of the gap of that knowledge so he can go off and do stuff. But the problem is we're now both stressed. And so I want to get stuff done. He wants to listen quickly and then interrupt and get the next step on, get out to do the job. And what happens is I only give him 30% of the message, and he's only got 30% to start with. So there's 40% of the message and understanding just floating around the ether. And that's exactly what he's just done with his sweaty sock jock thing, is the assumption that he knew that you thought, well, he thought you knew what sweaty meant in terms of rhyming slang. So there we go. Great example. Thank you, Stephen, for
Yeah.
bringing communications to life.
Yeah, mate, and it's funny because there's a couple here that we work together, and every now and again I'll say, hey, I mean this word, and I've lived in Australia for 20 years, Gareth, and I've been away for 24, 25 now. It's a long time I've been gone. So I'll say to the girls, oh, what's this word? What does this mean? And it's right, you're true, mate. That's exactly right. That's what we talk about. Sometimes I just don't know what the hell some of these words are all on about. But mate, your book, it really has this was actually one of the hardest ones for me to do, because sometimes the books that we read, they just cover one topic, but you've got so many and so many broad topics in that book. But one of the things that we've probably never really spoke about at the book club was like a just culture and a restorative culture. So I know that is a massive, massive topic. But I was just wondering again, how can we set up the conditions to start enabling a just culture or restorative culture?
Hands up who's got a just culture policy in their business. Okay, those who have, is it algorithm based? So you follow a flow chart that says do this, do that. In the event of so and so, did they mean this? And shout out, yeah, okay, so 2 out of 3. Okay, anybody else who's thinking about putting a just culture process in place, don't. Because seriously, it's a just culture algorithm is primarily there for an organization to protect itself. It's there as a, hey, look, we're going to look out for the workers because this is what we do. But actually, the best way you can do about, you can understand being just or having justness is about creating the environment to tell stories, context-rich stories, and understand that inside an organization, as long as you don't hit a regulatory or legal criminal framework, you can do a lot of learning inside your organization. But as soon as you step over the regulatory, legal, criminal piece, all bets are off when it comes to learning, unfortunately, because the organization has to protect itself. They're not going to throw itself under the bus to protect an individual. So what I would say is really what we want to do is create a learning culture within the organization, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to improve. So, you talk about the restorative culture, just culture of who's been hurt, what do they need, and whose job is it, or whose obligation is it to respond to that. If you're inside an organization, that's the leadership piece, and they've got to understand that. Once you start telling context-rich stories, warts and all, conflicts, workarounds, adaptations, actually the justness arrives. And my experience and the research that I've been doing is that actually once you start telling a context-rich story, all of the blame, all of the attacking stops, because now you put them in your shoes and your rationality, and you understand all of that stuff. If we don't have that culture that supports the learning, what happens is we have half-truths. We didn't tell a lie, we just didn't tell everything. We hide stuff, we only write down what we have to write down. And the problem is then the analysis is incomplete, and so we write more rules. And you turn around and say, hang on a minute, you've got 10 rules, they didn't follow those 10, somebody got injured, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to put 3 rules on top of that 10. So now we've got 13 rules to follow. Of course they'll follow them all. No, they won't. You've got to look at the context of what's driving people, influencing people to behave the way they did. And you can only do that by creating that storytelling that's there. And that starts with the leadership. And so my view of psychological safety and just culture is psychological safety is perspective. You create the environment that allows the latent failures, the hidden things to be unearthed, because somebody's going to come around and say, you know what, this sucks, it doesn't work, somebody's going to get hurt. And that leadership role goes, thank you, I've heard that. We want a challenger safety, we want a challenger community, but you have to congratulate that and you have to do something with it. When something bad happens and it's not of a very serious outcome, then actually, as in the sort of legal, criminal, legislative space, you can then look back and say, how does it make sense? Tell those stories. But you don't have to have an accident or a really bad event to create learning. You can just stop time, and we've got learning reviews, learning teams as well, as ways to basically say, how does it make sense for somebody to do what they do? You can't, for those two at the back who've got the processes, normally what happens in organizations, accident happens, go through the investigation, we get the report, get the just culture policy off the wall, brush it off, right, we've now got this report, how do we deal with this individual? And that report that you've got is a synthesis through the lens of the investigator. And if that investigator is looking for non-compliance, the report in front of you will be framed around non-compliance. So now you go through the flow diagram, ding, 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 right, march in the guilty so-and-so, that's it, they're out. So it's about creating that learning culture, not a just culture. Just culture is just an enabler, but actually it's often used too late.
Yeah, I think but Sidney Dekker talks about just culture being, oh, we just fired them, we just got rid of them. So that's like, yeah, I've heard him say that before. Mate, you spoke about the golden rules there in organisation. That wasn't one of the questions, but I would really like. I remember we had Rob Fisher in this room, and he spoke about. I'm at an organisation where we're looking to maybe remove the golden rules and replace them with life-saving controls. Just kind of wondering what you're seeing over in the UK or around the world when it comes to life-saving rules and etc.
So I would say that Northeast Australia is leading the way in a lot of this stuff because of Griffith University that's there, and Sydney, and Lund in Sweden. Fundamentally, as an organization that has that perspective that says we are trying to protect our people, and as long as they follow these rules, then they will be safe. And they don't actually understand the conflicts and the drivers that put in place to understand that. So exactly that piece about critical controls, and somebody was working with the last couple of days, and they just come up with a matrix that talks about critical controls, non-critical controls, were they effective or non-effective? And that's how they're basically looking at adverse events to be able to present to the board. And what they want to have are critical controls that were effective. So that's their saves, their good saves that happen. And they don't, if we have these events, the controls worked and people didn't get harmed, or people didn't get harmed and material did, okay, so be it. But they want to put stuff, show that our critical controls are working. We're never going to get zero error. We're never going to get zero accidents. But what we want to do is prevent that harm that's happening. And we do that by putting controls in place. And if they're not working, your workers will know whether or not those critical controls are not working or not. So having a golden rule, so as an example, working out in the oil rigs out in Middle East, and gloves was, PPE, leave the locker room, go out in the drill floor, people got to wear gloves. Temperature is 45 centigrade at the time. So they finish their locker room talk, they go outside, and there's a little bit of a handover, and they've got a little square box that's right next to the locker room outside on the deck where they can do their handover and they don't need to wear their PPE because they're considered in a safe zone at the stage. They're outside 45C, and they basically put their gloves in their back pocket because they're just too hot. And so I'm up in the sort of galley watching, because I'm just having lunch, and watch these guys, and they leave the safe area with their gloves in the back pocket. And the safety coach is there with me, and I'm like, and he's like, looks out, he goes, yes, and he's about to run down and grab the guys for basically breach of PPE. And I'm like, hang on a minute, there is this mental process that you step across the threshold from the locker room and you should be wearing the PPE. But they've stepped across the threshold to go into a discussion piece. And now they've left the safe area and they haven't had the mental trigger that says, I now move from a safe to an unsafe space. And they finished the conversation and off they went. And they hadn't had that trigger. So, yeah, golden rule, gloves, blah. And it's just like, hang on a minute. You've got to look at the context in which people are operating. They're not intentionally going out there to break those rules. And to turn around and say, pay more attention, be more careful, you are being reckless. No, not at all. There will be a reason why, and that's how we've got to explore that with that local rationality. How did it make sense? And that's, going back to the piece about communication. Steve, why did you go out there and do that? If I use the word why, I'm asking you to justify your behavior against my standard. But if I say to you, how did it make sense for you to do that? Now I can understand your rationality. And I'm moving from you as an individual to your thought process. So I don't think golden rules work.
Yeah,
It's the bottom line.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that, mate. Actually, Gareth touched on that. Why does it make sense for them to do that? That's something I use when I work a lot, and I kind of feel that question is transformational. If you really start, anytime something goes wrong, I wonder why that made sense for them to do that. And we
Change it how it made sense, not why. Why will invariably end up as an individual. How looks at context and actions.
There you go. A lesson for me, which is awesome. I'm going to turn it on to you guys now. So Gareth kindly sent me a little goodie bag with some stuff. So I was just wondering if anyone's got any questions for Gareth that they'd like to ask. Oh, jeez.
You better ask questions, otherwise it's going to be a really short meeting.
Yeah. We're going to go into the music questions soon.
Gareth, you mentioned quite a lot there about telling stories.
Yes.
So you may have been asking before, what are your top 3 tips or delivery mechanisms for telling better stories to workers at the sharp end?
You might have to repeat the question to Gareth.
So from that point of view, is what's the tips to help telling stories by workers?
Oh, telling stories to workers. Best delivery mechanism or tips.
All right. So I'd start with get them to tell a story. Find their stories. So start as a little piece. That's right. There was that in the microphone. So to start off with, the story that you want to initiate to get them has to put you in a place of vulnerability. If it's uncomfortable for you to tell a story about something that's gone wrong, adaptation, workaround, luck, then that's the story to tell. Because what you're trying to do is create trust straight away. There is no way that they're going to trust you unless you put yourself out there. And that's the initiation piece. And that's when we talk about psychological safety, is the fact that leaders have to be vulnerable to start with. If you can talk about a mistake that you've made, or an error you've made, or a lapse you've made, and the context that surrounds that, then that works. If you can get a story, if you want to pull stories out of others, encourage that story in others, is ask them about something that's got no jeopardy. So I just, at the start of this, we were talking about communication and sweaty socks. Now there's no, if you want to talk about miscommunication, often we want stories to be initiated in the workspace. We want to be about workspace stories, but people feel vulnerable and they don't necessarily can draw the link between what's going on. So if you can create a story that shows the cognitive process, the social context, the peer pressure that's involved, then you can say to them, have you got an example in the workspace where you've got an issue about miscommunication? And then you can get those stories out. So be vulnerable, create a story or tell a story that brings the learning point out that is not about professional jeopardy, and then get them to say, okay, so do you understand how miscommunication can happen? Okay, tell us a story about miscommunication here, because now they've got an idea of what miscommunication looks like. Does that help?
Yeah, thanks. Good on you, mate. No, thank you. Michael?
Gareth, talking about stories, what's the best story you've heard dealing with organisations of how they've gone from doing stuff traditionally to changing that mindset and doing something different?
Oh my goodness me. I would say it's a two-parter, and it just shows the difficulty. So, I forgot his first name, Hegarty.
Obviously an Irishman.
No, but wrote a paper about bringing restorative culture into a construction site. And so they managed, so they were a tier 2 company working for a tier 1 client, and big construction site, and they managed to bring a restorative culture into their environment, learning environment, and they got loads and loads of learning, loads of accelerated problem solving that was going on. Unfortunately, about 15 months into the project, their client turned around and said, we don't like this. We want to go back to the blame and shame process, and completely destroyed all of the work that they'd done inside. And I'll forward the paper on to Steve to share. But it's a great piece where actually, if you get the leadership bought in, and you've got to start at the leadership. If the leadership don't get it, you're on a hiding to nothing. And, you know, it might be that you get a foot in with a sponsor at the leadership team level, then you've got to start. But the Trojan mice is the thing that's often talked about as ways of little steps to get in. But if you're supporting somebody else, you can't necessarily carry on through how you want to. And that you've then got to make a decision. Do I just suck it up or go and find somewhere else? There's plenty of failure points, but it requires belief. And I think the fact that you're all here, you want to learn, it's getting that passion. Yes, there's beer and pizza because that's going to help you. But you know, it's finding ways to encourage people. The hardest part is determining what a return of investment is, because there is no silver bullet piece. There is no piece of equipment that says, if you put this in place, your productivity, your results and everything will go up massively. It's a long game. It's marginal gains. And actually what you probably find is you have reduced turnover, and that's a huge benefit to an organization.
Actually, I'm not here for the beer and pieces, but thanks for that.
Yeah, he's not even a safety professional. He's just here for the free beer.
Well, actually, and on that point, I'm not a safety professional either, and that is what makes it really hard to get into businesses, because I can't do the safety piece, get a foot in and go, hey, try this. I have to work with people who get it and they want to learn, and that's much harder to bring in place. So
it's funny, Gareth. I had a meeting with my boss today. I had my 6 monthly performance review thing, and I was like, I'm totally in the wrong role. Like, I'm not a safety guy anymore. Like, I change and transformation and culture. That's where I should be sitting, not bloody running glove campaigns and stuff like that. That's just not me. I need to be trying something different. So yeah, I totally resonate with that one. It's about, I kind of feel the people in this room probably are starting to think that they're moving away from safety and they're becoming this other profession, which is really cool. You talked to earlier. I remember you've just prompted me to think about a story that we had in a place that I was working in, and I remember the employee relations people coming to us and saying, "Hey, we're not writing any more warning letters. What the hell's going on? Like, why are people? What's going on? We should be writing hundreds of these, and now we're not." And we're like, "Good, we're doing something good."
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's it. So you taught them all the skills to hide the incidents then, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. We just basically say, no, don't tell us, we'll make sure it's all right. That's it. We'll look at
her hand up, red and white, I think.
Yes. One of the things that I constantly struggle with, Gareth, and it might be a me thing, but I suspect it probably isn't, is this tension of what I would like to see happen in organisations, which is very much in line with the idealistic just culture model, and then the reality of what actually happens and the things that I have to reconcile every day, where I have to sell my soul a little bit to do the job that needs to be done so I can do the work that I actually want to do. And I was just wondering if you had any advice for me, aka other people in this room who are in the same boat, of ways that you can sleep well at night, knowing that you do have to do a little bit of that stuff to do the meaningful work so that you can progress the work that really matters.
What, you got to swallow that little bit of sick each time?
Yeah, every single time, every time.
So what I would look at is the marginal gains piece, and just congratulate, you know, in that coaching space of self-coaching, what good did I do today, and was it enough to offset the little bit of sick that I had to swallow to deal with that? Because you're right, there is that bit that says, do I really want to do that? And if you're values driven like I am, and I'm guessing you are because you just asked that question, is if you can reinforce those positive things that you're doing, it's great. If you get to the point where you're actually on the other side of it, like I used to work for an organization, and my son went in to see my wife and said, and he's only 11, and he said, I don't know who daddy's on the phone to or the call to, but he's just about to explode. And I was unaware of what was going on. I was getting incredibly stressed about this. And when I went in, Alexander said that to me. I'm like, oh, or maybe I don't want to be here actually. And I just got totally sucked into it and decided, right, I'm going to leave that organization. But for me, I mean, I've been doing this stuff in the diving space since 2012. I wrote a paper delivering training since 2016, and it's still really, really hard. But when you get things like I did yesterday, a little Instagram message from somebody in Brazil saying, thank you very much for all the work you're doing. You're making a difference. We're following you. It's like, yes, that's what makes it worthwhile. And, you know, yet even yesterday in the training delivery, I didn't think I was as engaging as I could have been, should have been, because there were a fair amount of theory to be delivered, but we had some interactions and games and things. And at the end of the 2 days, one of the students, people in the class said, thanks very much for making it so engaging. And I'm like, I don't think it was, but if you did, that's awesome. And that's, you know, so celebrate the little wins to keep yourself motivated, and then constantly think, how can I nudge my team leader, my exec to go a certain way? Can I just introduce, you know, changing the words? That's not a huge step for people, but it can have massive implications in terms of change going forward. So focus on the little things and just believe in yourself.
Thank you, we'll have one more question, Mick. I did.
Gareth, I just thought it was interesting. It seemed like there was a bit of a parallel between when you were talking about just culture and situational awareness. So I think I've got a unique perspective that in my previous life as a powder monkey and coming through mining industries I think I was fortunate to have seen when that was done really well, the just culture on the tail end was actually what they framed what you were taught on or how you were taught. And very similarly in let's call it easy, ICAM, when you're talking, say, causal analysis, was also part of the training framework. So I was kind of interested to see when you talked about what just really is a learning framework. I think it's not just about the learning framework, but it's about what you're learning about. So if you're being judged on something, for it to be just, it needs to be something that you've been given the information on, trained on, given the tools to actually succeed in it. That's where I see the mismatch there, not necessarily with the actual framework of just culture or causal motivation or anything like that, but have you been given the tools to follow that through? I just thought that was an interesting kind of a parallel there.
Absolutely. And what if you haven't got hold of Ivan Papili's latest book, Human Organization Potential, he talks about margin for maneuver. And what we're talking about is the gap between the threat and where you're operating. And what we want to do is capacity. We want to increase that margin, that capacity. And you do that by telling stories, and you understand the context so you can spot things before they become critical. Often after investigations or something's gone wrong, people say, don't do that. And by that, they often mean the outcome. Well, I can't do anything about the outcome. When it arrives, great. You know, I've just smacked my thumb with a hammer, or I've just mashed my hand in a piece of equipment. Don't do that again. Yeah, thanks. No shit. Actually, what are the things that we're looking for is the cues and clues that lead us to understand what's going on. And Rob Fisher's work is good on that, the mental models piece of understanding the context that leads to an adverse event, or the context that leads to a problem that's then solved. And so what we're trying to do is that learning loop, and I'll send something else to Stephen, learning in loops and the learning review guide. And it's all about getting your team to spot something that's important or relevant before it becomes so critical you can't recover the situation. So you've got time and space. And I'm always learning. A session that I ran a week and a half ago in Washington, DC, training class, and somebody said, but surely the speed at which you're operating or the speed at which change happens has an impact on how important situation awareness is. So if something changes really quickly, you have to have a vision that goes out much further. So your capacity, your margin has to be longer in time so you can detect, recognize it, and then do an adjustment. But if you just have a fixed margin in time, the space you're in might be moving too quickly that you can't recover it.
That space where you see a well-designed and thought-out goal will play a part, though, Gareth.
So, but I would say it's not.
Bang and bum kind of thing, but
I would say it's not a golden rule. I would say it's the fact that you're giving people pointers to say this might come up. But in any space, even in aviation space, that there are no golden rules. There are principles about safe operations, but there's always this caveat that says the pilot doesn't have to follow these as long as they've got the experience and they can justify why they did it. And the problem with golden rules is it simplifies the training process to understand the context around that. And that to me is the big issue with golden rules, is you don't train people around the context that's there so they can spot the proverbial about to hit the fan.
Gareth, I want you to have a think about the best question there so I can give away the book that you've given me, right? But we'll come back to that in a second. But there's a couple of questions that I really want to ask you about. And everybody here would experience this, but we talk about common sense. Like, it's just common sense, right? It's just common sense. Why do they not get it? I would love to know your thoughts on that, and then we'll sort of start to look at finishing up.
And that links into the question right at the back. Common sense is often attributed after the event by somebody who's got experience of that event in the past, and they know that they've had an adverse outcome. Because then you can judge and go, well, I knew that was going to happen. It's common sense. And that's what I was saying earlier. Has that person encountered that before? No. Have they encountered that same situation before? So they may have done the task before, but have they ever encountered the conflicts or the context that's surrounding that's changed their behaviors? So accidents don't happen as deviations from rules. Accidents happen as deviations from normal. And normal could be the rules, and often it's not. And we manage that capacity, that safety, through our experiences and the feedback we have. If we don't have feedback, we don't know where the boundaries of the system are. We don't know where common sense starts and finishes. It's a shared understanding within a group of what something should, or how something should happen, or how something should be done. But if you've never encountered that before, you've never included it in your training, and there's an assumption. So you made the assumption about, if you go to Scotland or even go to the UK and talk about sweaties, they'll know what that is. And so that would be common sense because you know what a sweaty is. But you go somewhere else, and you go, well, yeah, I get joked about being called a sweaty. A what? Well, it's just common sense, isn't it? Sweaty job, sock. So that's the piece there, is understanding that common sense isn't, it's a fallacy.
Yeah. Maybe just one last sort of question about, I remember when we caught up a couple of weeks.
Have you ever come across drift before in an organisation, Steve, where somebody keeps on changing the goalposts? Like, just one more question? Like, just one more question?
Yeah.
Great examples.
But it's one, I really wanted everybody to hear it, mate.
Go for it. I'm bringing it up to the point of what drift looks like.
Because when we caught up, mate, you had this amazing method of journaling and using ChatGPT, and I kind of think everybody would learn something amazing from that. So that's the last one, I promise, and then we'll go to the music questions, and then we'll finish.
Sure. So I'm a bit of a geeky person, and I love writing. So day 106 this morning. So that means about 107 days ago, I started working with a coach. And she said, actually start journaling your ideas, because I'm trying to grow the business. I'm trying to rationalize the 3 streams that I have. Human diver as me delivering content, developing my instructors. I've got about 12 now as my team. I love the delivery. I love developing people, but the diving space doesn't pay as well as the corporate space. So I've also got the corporate space. So my coach is saying, look, just get your ideas down. Think about it. every day write a journal. And she talked about morning pages was something that came from the creatives as a way of getting ideas down. You have to write 3 pages every day. And I was like, I know I've got loads of stuff and I like technology and I like to be able to move stuff around. So I use a journal called Day One. Online, it's Mac based, so it works across multiple platforms, but I use it on my Mac. And I can type much quicker than I can handwrite. So I set myself a goal of 1,000 words a day, which is, it takes me about, well, this morning's 24 minutes, between 22 and 30 minutes to write 1,000 words. And that's a lot of stuff. And you see these people going, what? When you're in the flow, so I come downstairs, grab a coffee, put my, sort of active noise headphones on, put some writing music on, and I'll just go, and there's loads of stuff there. And it's like, how do I condense that into something that's useful? So I copy that 1,000 words or so, put it into ChatGPT and say, summarize this and tell me the 3 key points that came out of that. And then I stack that at the bottom of the journal as a summary piece. So I then basically get reinforcement of the key ideas. So yeah, it's good fun. And so go back. I will go back, but the first 30 days, they said, don't go and read your previous journals. The idea is just to capture ideas and get them down. And there are times where I'll go, wow. And then like a conversation, it'll just spear off in different directions and capturing those ideas. And then at the bottom of that journal, I write down the actions that I've got to take out of that journal as well.